cracking down strongly on sanctuary cities that shield criminal aliens.
That the city of Chicago may be the first to bring a lawsuit, but I'm also confident we will not be the last, because other cities know that these are false choices that the Trump Justice Department is asking us to make. My definition of a sanctuary city is a city that does not cooperate with federal law enforcement authorities. It is the responsibility of every city and every citizen to cooperate with law enforcement, and that's what we're demanding.
Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel is saying it is illegal for the federal government to hold back public safety grants because Chicago is a sanctuary city. They filed a lawsuit today, and just before this show started, the Attorney General fired back in a statement, in part saying no amount of federal taxpayer dollars will help a city that refuses to help its own residents. The political leadership of Chicago has chosen deliberately and intentionally to adopt a policy that obstructs this country's lawful immigration system. This is astounding given the unprecedented violent crime surge in Chicago, with the number of murders in 2016 surpassing both New York and Los Angeles combined. This administration will not simply give away grant dollars to city governments that proudly violate the rule of law and protect criminal aliens at the expense of public safety. So it's this simple: comply with the law or forego taxpayer dollars. Sanctuary city policy affecting not just Chicago but many cities. Let's bring in our panel. Jonah Goldberg, senior editor at National Review, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, and A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics. Molly.
Well, federal law could not be more clear. State and local governments do not have the right to deviate from federal law when it comes to immigration policy. They have to share information. And unlike so many things where the federal government is kind of overbroad and overreaching, immigration is one of those things that is specifically stipulated in the Constitution as something that is handled by our federal government. So this is something that there will be a tough case for Chicago to make.
The mayor and some of the people who stood beside him in this press conference over the weekend said it's just not right. Take a listen.
The burn grants are for technology, for everything from vehicles to radios to tasers, that help strengthen the professionalization of our police department and create a proactive environment. But they also help build trust.
We will not compromise the rights, safety, or break the sacred trust of the people that live in and visit Chicago in order to obtain those resources.
These burn grants deal with money for various elements of cities' defense, and you have these conditions now, Jonah: no restrictions on federal local sharing of immigration status information, give ICE unlimited access to local police stations and law enforcement facilities to interrogate arrestees about their immigration status, and require cities to provide ICE with at least 48 hours notice prior to an arrestee's release. And that is really where the rubber meets the road on this lawsuit.
Yeah, I think that this kind of needs to be unpacked a little bit. I generally think that sanctuary cities is just a terrible idea. At the same time, I understand why local, like first responders and police and whatnot, do worry about getting cooperation out of these communities, and I think you can respect that reasonable concern without saying that cities get to flout federal law. There's also an enormous amount of virtue signaling going on by Rahm Emanuel and these guys. I mean, $3 million out of a police budget that's over $1.2 billion is a rounding error for the most part. This has a lot more to do with big coalition Democratic politics, with immigration politics and the rest, than with a newfound love and respect for federalism by people who think every other aspect of our lives should be left up to the central government in Washington. Understanding
Chicago and Illinois broadly, Democrat territory. But, A.B., for people sitting in Chicago listening to the mayor talk that way and dealing with a murder rate and the number of murders skyrocketing, how do you think that plays politically?
Well, I think this is a really stupid hill to die on politically for Democrats. If there is a case to be made that sanctuary cities, that they need to flout federal law because otherwise the whole idea is, you know, the federal law is injurious, enforcing it is injurious to community policing, and then they cannot keep their communities safe without doing that. They're going to have to go on an education campaign across this country with a bunch of police forces and really change the way that people see this at a majority. I don't think liberals think that sanctuary cities are the top of their priority list. I think they're looking for a message from this party on the economy. And he made a perfect case for why they need that grant money. He needs that grant money. He can comply with federal law. It just is absolutely ridiculous politics for Democrats. They can disagree with President Trump on his new push to limit legal immigration. They can be for immigration reform. But pushing this as a means to keep their community safe, especially in a place like Chicago, it just doesn't square.
There are a number of cities, Molly, who are repealing sanctuary status now across the country, and it runs the gamut. A number of different kinds of cities, different demographics, as you see there on the map. Here is the head of ICE talking about sanctuary cities and what makes it tough for them.
If you're an alien smuggler and you're smuggling people in this country for a living, that's one sales pitch. We can get you to a sanctuary city where that city will help shield you from immigration. So rather than arresting a violent criminal in the safety, security, and privacy of a county jail, we got to go knock on the door. We got to arrest them in the community. So the community's put at risk, our officers are put at risk.
Now, the local guys say they frighten the immigrants and they don't make telephone calls, and it is a cycle in those communities. Well, that's how they push back.
There are all sorts of concerns that you should have and why we need a coherent immigration policy. It absolutely is a human rights problem when people are luring people, promising them if they can just make it to a sanctuary city, they'll be okay. We've had in recent weeks we've had all those deaths that we saw in that horrible situation in the truck in Texas. And so everybody, Democrat and Republican, need to recover a much better conversation for talking about these things. There is a reason why we have rule of law and not rule of men, and we can debate whether we want to have stricter or more lax immigration policy, but we all need to be on the same page, and we need to understand that having borders and having laws is something that serves the entire community.
We're not lawyers here, but is there standing here for Chicago, and do you think this makes it all the way up to the Supreme Court?
I think it goes to the Supreme Court. I talked to a couple of lawyer types today, and the law is so murky on all of this. The Supreme Court set a test, has never established like a test for how you can judge when the federal government can condition funding. So we played this game a lot with the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit and drunk driving with highway funds, and that was allowed. But the Medicaid expansion under the first tranche of Obamacare was not allowed by the Supreme Court by 7-2. I think that one of these cities is going to get some liberal judge who wants to do this sort of preening thing about I'm on the side of the immigrants like we've seen with the Muslim ban stuff, and eventually it's going to go to the Supreme Court. Personally, I mean, I'm with Molly. I think, look, everyone has to obey the federal law. But I generally don't like, in our federal republic, the federal government trying to push around cities to do things that they want and making taxpayer dollars contingent on it.
We should point out the special report is going to be live from Chicago Thursday and Friday. We've invited Mayor Rahm Emanuel on the show. We will interview Illinois' governor on Friday.